Let's say you wanted to go into the drug dealing business. How would you do it? Well, you would do it legally, of course. Welcome back to the G Spot, where we talk about true crime, actual criminal cases, straight from my own case files. I've been a criminal defense lawyer for over 29 years, and I've got stories. So sit back, relax, and welcome to my world. Let me take you a few years back. It's a crisp Monday morning. James is standing on the tarmac at LAX, right next to a private jet airplane, while his suitcases are being loaded onto the plane. He's looking into the distance, thinking about his business. He's about 35 years old, 6 feet tall. His hair is slicked back. He's wearing tailored slacks, a beautiful shirt and jacket, and wingtip Oxford shoes. And of course, aviators. Why those? Well, he's at the airport after all, right? He's got a very smug look on his face. And for good reason. His business is very profitable, and he built it from the ground up, all on his own. No help from anybody else. You see, James has a marijuana dispensary up in San Francisco and a marijuana grow house in LA. In San Francisco, marijuana prices are through the roof. Very lucrative to sell it there. But it's very expensive to maintain a grow house there. Space is at a premium, and price per square foot is unbelievably expensive. LA is way cheaper. In fact, it's so much cheaper that James saves money by growing the stuff in LA and flying it using a private plane up to San Francisco twice a week. And so there he is, thinking about how successful he is and how great he set everything up. And all of a sudden, he hears a thunk. He turns around, and one of his suitcases is on the ground, cracked wide open. And his beautifully packaged weed is all over the tarmac. "Sorry, Mr. James," says one of the crew. "It slipped out of my hands." James looked at the guy and he said, "Listen, don't worry about it. It's okay. Let's just pick it up. Put it back in. No big deal." "Well, actually, it is a big deal," said the pilot, who kind of came out to see what was happening. He looked at James and he said, "Look, dude, I got to call it in. I can't just leave it like this. I don't know what's going on." And call it in he did. The cops were there literally within minutes. They swarmed the place. And listen, I mean, as far as they were concerned, they had a big-time drug dealer on their hands. I mean, this is the guy that's flying weed using a private airplane. That's a big deal. So James all of a sudden found himself sitting on the same tarmac he was just standing on, but now in handcuffs. He turned to the main guy, one of the officers, and he said, "Listen, I got all the paperwork. You guys are making a big mistake. Everything is legal. I have the right to do this. I have a dispensary up north. I have a grow house in LA. I have all the paperwork." And the guy said, "Okay, no problem. Let me take a look at it. And I have to call it in. Call in my sergeant." The word from the sergeant was, "Look, we have no idea what these papers are. He could have photoshopped them. Take the guy in, confiscate the weed, and we'll deal with it later." And that's exactly what happened. James ended up in jail overnight while his family scrambled to bail him out, because the bail was pretty high, actually. Once he was out, he hired us, and we jumped into the case. So you would think that this would be easy, right? All we need to do is show this paperwork to the DA's office, to law enforcement, and show to them that the papers are actually legit, and this whole thing goes away, right? Well, not exactly. You see, in those days, marijuana laws were just born. They were just put on the books. We were just getting off the ground. And it was in a state of flux to an extent. And the laws and regulations that were actually written were not extremely clear either. And so you can kind of read these statutes one way or another. And obviously, law enforcement had their way of reading it, and we had ours. And so, first of all, we needed to educate ourselves quickly, too. And then we had to make sure that James was telling us the truth, that the paperwork was legit. And then we had to sit down with law enforcement, sit down with the DA's office, and prove to them that our way of reading the laws and regulations was the correct way. Also, time was of the essence. You see, weed dries out, it degrades, becomes worthless after some time. And the police evidence locker wasn't really known for its humidity. It wasn't much of a humidor. So we had to work fast. So after countless hours of document reviews, meetings, and enough coffee to probably float that jet airplane, we finally convinced law enforcement and the DA's office that they had no case. Everything was legit, everything was legal, and above board. So, what about the weed? What about the weed? Asked the police. Well, if James had all the paperwork and it was legit, he had the right to possess that weed, he had the right to fly it from LA to San Francisco, then the weed should be returned to him. It is his property. Well, we don't return confiscated drugs. Well, you're going to have to return this one because he has a right to it. And return it they did. I think it might have been the first time in the history of LA County where they were returning drugs that they confiscated. We were receiving pounds upon pounds of marijuana from law enforcement. It was a surreal moment. And like I said in my previous video, I felt almost like Tony Montana. So what's the lesson here? Well, if you're going to sell drugs, do it legally. Make sure your paperwork is all legit. And make sure you have very sturdy luggage. Very important. Thank you for tuning in. Next time, we're going to talk about over $800 million black market pharmaceutical fraud. So stay tuned for that one. I'm Mr. G. This is my spot. And these are my stories.